I reckon the best people for STEM and for technology are all our ballerinas, right? Like they show up 2-3 times a week for dance. They're super disciplined. They persist and persist and persist on a dance or a move. They laugh when it doesn't work. They show up for a concert. They're some of the best skills for technology. It's
100%.
creative.
Yeah.
It's thinking outside the square. It's persisting.
Yeah.
It's failing on things that, like, quickly moving on from the things that don't work and harnessing the things that do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what I hear too often is, what's your work? Is it 3, 2, 4, 1? People talk about the days in and out of the office.
Yes.
And they simplify it into this kind of numerical ratio. That's not flexibility. It frustrates me when I see the headlines about, return to office call and companies are shifting to 60% of the time in the office.
And we're shifting the conversation away from outcomes.
That's right.
Because that doesn't necessarily achieve the outcomes that you're trying to drive. I think the question is, are we measuring the right thing?
Sheena Peeters, Senior Director at Cognizant, a true powerhouse in technology. With nearly 30 years of experience, Sheena has built a remarkable career driving innovation and digital transformation across top firms like EY, KPMG, NAB, Aus Post, UniSuper, HESTA, Mercy Health, and many more. She even founded her own startup, Rasberry, and has an entrepreneurial edge to her impressive background. Sheena's journey spans consulting, startups, and corporate leadership, giving her a unique perspective on strategic thinking and big picture execution. Also, Sheena has navigated and thrived as a woman in technology. Look, I guess we've touched on there another couple of interesting themes, which is you as a working parent. And you've been incredibly successful and you found that balance. How have you managed to navigate that?
Well,
Get ready for a great conversation as we dive into her career, insights, and the key to success as a woman in tech. So Sheena, thank you for joining me today. I really, really enjoyed researching your background and your career story. So I'm really keen today as we work through that, there's 3 themes that kind of stood out to me that I'd love to unpack. The first one is really what does it take to be successful as a woman in technology? The second one is, I guess, your journey. You've gone consulting to startup to corporate to consulting. You've kind of followed the almost full circle. So what have you learned along the way through that journey? And then finally, that kind of strategic thinking, big picture thinking, kind of what gets lost when people are in the weeds, and you've had the perspective of that helicopter view, so to speak. But I'm going to go back. I'm going to start off right at the back, and I kind of figured that you must be from New Zealand. I deduced because you went to the University of New Zealand, which would be unusual if you're from Australia. So is that right?
yes, actually it was the University of Waikato.
Okay.
In New Zealand. And yes, I did grow up there.
Yep.
And I actually really enjoyed going out into the country because it is a university in the country. And, it's surrounded by a lot of farmland.
Yep.
And the population in Hamilton, which is where this university is, fluctuates during the, university school year.
Yeah.
And then it just reduces to an empty country town, once everyone's gone home.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a really wonderful experience. I really enjoyed it.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people, particularly what I've learned since I came to Australia, is most people live at home when they go to university, which is obviously different in New Zealand. In the UK, that's different. I think in the US, you kind of see this on television. People go away to university as well. I think Aussies kind of miss out on an experience at that point in their life.
Yeah, and I've got 3 children who are at home who are all in university.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating, right? Because one of the biggest challenges is public transporting. Now, my kids public transported, they took the public transport for the high school. But this is a challenge for, our kids that live at home. We had the challenge of having to learn to cook and, manage getting in and out of uni on time and making new friends, right? Because you're living in a community. But I think the upside of that is you learn about those skills of collaborating, working together. Because when you're at home, your behaviours of living at home and how you live, it's all pretty acceptable.
Yeah.
And then you end up in a halls of residence, and then
That's right.
I don't know about the UK, but you naturally move into like a a apartment or a house, share home, right, with other people.
Yes. Yeah.
And then suddenly you realize, oh, actually, everyone's grown up differently.
Yes. Yeah.
What was norm for me is actually not norm for you. Like, norm in my house is that you do the dishes after dinner and then you clean up the kitchen and then you're done. Norm for somebody else is, we'll get up and do it in the morning.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's a way to learn. I guess you're right. You only know what happens within your own house. You may have friends and so forth. You stay at friends' house, but that's not reality when you've got to live with other people.
I have a random story for you, actually, for sharing random stories. So this is going to be one that all the youth of today will not be able to relate to.
Yeah.
But we had the payphone.
Yeah.
So you could because no one had their own phones.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to share this payphone to ring your families back home. You'd have to have the coins and you'd have to put it in the payphone and different people would need to queue up to talk to families at home. That was quite funny. Now that I reflect on that.
It's funny, isn't it? You forget about those things, but they've just completely disappeared from society. But it was so common. You're right, making sure you had the right amount of change and the coins so you could make those phone calls. And God, we're going to get nostalgic. All right. So when you were at university, I was fascinated to see that you studied computing and mathematics. Why?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, so I've got to step back a little bit. Yeah. When I was growing up, I wanted to work at the airport. And I know that sounds very generic, but I had this nostalgia around adventures happened. They started and finished at the airport. If people were coming to the airport, they were going somewhere.
Yep.
They were coming from somewhere. And I was good at maths. So then I thought, well, I could do something that was maths related, like engineering. So it was quite random.
Yeah.
Or be a pilot. Although I wasn't really fascinated by these long haul flights where you're, piloting the plane. And I know some people would find that interesting.
Yeah.
But then in year 10, I did a work experience with a company that was doing seismic processing.
Okay.
And at the time, they were measuring rock, basically, and I'm not a seismic processing expert, so for everybody who now comments on this, but they were looking at how to actually build internet cables under the floor bed, under the ocean, right? And they needed to understand different compositions around rock. And they had supercomputers doing this. So this was my job was largely photocopying and hanging out with the supercomputers, not actually doing anything meaningful. But the exposure to that really heightened my curiosity.
Interesting.
And so I guess I then narrowed down on, well, what could I do? Because I was good at maths.
Yeah.
And no one told me I wasn't good at maths. I wasn't actually great at maths. I just decided I was good at it.
Yeah.
And and then that led me to, and then I came across the supercomputers. I thought maths and supercomputers. That sounds like my thing.
Yeah. Wow. So that's quite early on in your life at this point, right? Where you've kind of decided, right, that's where I'm going to go. And I guess when I was reading that, I was thinking, I guess participation in STEM courses today is low in women. I think there's different statistics on this, but typically below 20% of courses are female. I'm not sure what it would have been at that point in time, whether it's changed much sort of historically. But I was just interested. Did you feel that? Did you sense that when you were studying this? Did you feel that I'm one of the very few women on this course? Was it?
It's so fascinating, right? Because my awareness and probably our awareness is so heightened today. When I went to uni, I was really naive around this.
Okay.
I just assumed everybody else that was like me, female, was doing maths, or science or something. And spot on. Like, what was fascinating is that when I was in halls, when I, went to live in halls of residence, there was very few people that were female that were doing this, and that was my first sort of, you're not in my school of maths and science. And I don't know in the UK, but in New Zealand, like we had the School of Maths and the School of Law and the School of Economics, and everybody seemed to be part of the School of Economics, Business and Economics, and the School of Arts.
Yep.
All my female friends. And then I actually started to attend, and of course in your first year you're attending a variety of courses because you're doing electives as well.
Yeah.
And then, when I was attending my maths courses, it was like, there's actually only 3 females in this class.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And that was probably my first, like real awareness that I was actually in a minority, and that number got smaller and smaller as obviously I got further in the years. I mean, for me, I cross-credited into courses in business. So I did strategy and I did marketing because I thought that they would be quite complementary.
Yeah.
And today, you know, we've got sort of business information system type degrees, right? But in those days we didn't. It was very much you were either doing computer science or you were doing business and economics.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed, because I did accounting as an elective at school.
Yep.
And so I really enjoyed the economics and accounting side. And then, I sort of just extended myself into that realm. But if I didn't, I probably would have felt more isolated being one of the few females in the course.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you were talking there, I was reflecting back, because I reckon we're probably a similar age. So this would have been mid-90s, I'm going to guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And the diversity wasn't really spoken about then.
No.
It wasn't a topic. It didn't really come up. And I do wonder if, and by the way, it's a good thing that we do talk about it now. So I'm not going down that path, but it's more, I do wonder how much more there's a global awareness now around things because of Instagram and TikTok and the internet and world news. And I remember being in that mid-90s and thinking I had a pretty good view of the world and understanding the world, but I didn't at all. Now I look back, it's ludicrous. And I didn't have any of this kind of information about what goes on in the world. It was a relatively narrow view, but in some ways that just meant that you just kind of got on and didn't really stop and question stuff.
No, it's actually true. And you do have those aha moments like, oh, there's no other females in this course. Or, you know, when I graduated, I think I graduated with like three to five, you know, females in the, and, you know, you do have those aha moments, but of course, because it's not, you're right, it's not a conversation that you're having, whether it's through media or whether it's through, you know, access to internet or social media or even print, right? So it wasn't something where you actually went, this looks like a problem.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It wasn't until you're immersed in it when you maybe start to think those things, but then you're young and enjoying life and you just kind of get on with it, right? And see where it's going to go next. I guess there's a nice segue, actually. We're talking about the kind of current generation. And I did see a LinkedIn post where you mentioned that your daughter was recognised for outstanding leadership in STEM, her STEM club. And I was just interested, do you think what you do inspires your daughter to do what she's doing there within that STEM club?
I think, yes. I want to say yes. I do have two daughters and not both of them are doing STEM.
Okay. So one's the favourite.
You know, that's right. One, I keep joking that, you know, one of my daughters is, and it's lovely, like she's super community. She actually reminds me a little bit of me when I was younger, very social justice, very community orientated. I say this now and this is going to go out in the airways. She may not make money.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But at least the other one might actually be able to take care of me. So I've got one that'll make an impact and one that might take care of me when I'm elderly. Yeah. Let's see if this plays out. The point is that I think for me, you know, it's about having the conversation about what's possible. And ultimately it's up to them to decide. You know, my youngest was she was the one that did gaming and she was naturally interested and curious about technology. Yeah. You know, she, all of our kids are involved in technology, whether they're interested in how it works and its function is a different thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, whereas my oldest was just interested in something different. Yeah. And I think that for me, my role is to ensure that they understand that everything is possible. So here's a story. Both my daughters went to a girls' school.
Yep.
And I often did the ballet run because I had the 7-seater vehicle. And so I often had 5 girls in the back of my car. And I remember that one day when, you know, I was driving and they were all just chatting, right? It's a car full of girls just chit-chatting. And they're talking about how they weren't good at maths. And I was really surprised by this conversation because it was not something I grew up with, right? Yeah. And no one ever told me because I was a female, I wasn't good at maths. Simply that correlation was not something that I understood. And so later on I said to my daughter, you know, how come everyone thinks they're not good at maths? And she said, oh, I don't know, Mum. Like, People talk about it all the time. Like everyone, like, you know, we're not good at math. You know, us girls, we're supposedly not good at maths. But my daughters themselves actually never had that issue. In fact, they both, regardless of what they were doing, both did maths and physics or some form of STEM subjects right through high school. So I think, and whether they ultimately use it for something is a completely different story. But I think at the end of the day, for me, it's what's possible. So if they ever said to me, you know, I'm actually not that great at maths because I'm a female, I'll probably be having a conversation to sort of understand why. You know, because I think, and maybe this is part of the language and the things that are embedded, those systemic things that are norms that we need to overcome. In the case of Emily, she was super interested in being STEM captain. She wrote her funny speech and, you know, she's very, very creative, which is really fascinating. She is not your natural right brain thinker. And I think what's fantastic about that is that technology is all about solving problems. And so, interestingly, Emily was never interested in code like a girl, code camp. You know, I sent her to all those things. I gave all my kids and my son as well exposure to all of that. And it was the things that she was least interested in doing. She's like, I don't like code camp. I'm like, code camp's fun. What did you build? Oh, we built an app. You know, isn't that fun? But what she was interested in is solving problems, right? And so that curiosity, I think, has led her to STEM Club.
Interesting.
And I've probably gone too long on this answer, but we may as well talk about STEM Club. So she came home one day. She was STEM captain. I'm like, oh, what does STEM captain do? And she's like, I'm not really sure. We haven't really done anything in years. I was like, this could be our homework exercise. And, you know, my role is really just to be able to enable and open up doors, right, which is the thing I can do. So I connected Emily with a whole bunch of incredible women in STEM. And you know, and they all leaned in and they showed up to her school. In fact, I had more offers of people wanting to come and speak at STEM Club than we could accommodate. Till eventually the principal started attending STEM Club. And she commented on, wow, like there's all these incredible women that are showing up to STEM Club. And then STEM Club became STEAM Club because STEAM Club with the arts is now supposedly an interesting thing. So I think for me, like that's happening in 2024. Like I wish it was happening in, you know.
Yeah, of course. Look, and that's the flip side. There may not have been awareness. We were kind of ignorance is bliss, right? It was kind of where we were going back from the 90s and being nostalgic. But actually now, because people are talking about it, investing in it, because of what you're doing to support your daughter, which by the way is incredible, is what should be happening. And what I also love from that is that people think that if you work in tech, you write code.
Yes.
Right. Kind of wear the hoodie, you sit in a dark room and you write code. But actually tech is about solving problems. And it's about understanding problems and it's understanding human nature. You know, I talk to my daughter, she's also exceptional at maths, advanced maths and whatnot. And I talk to her, you know, you should look at cybersecurity and think about these things. And she kind of looks at me like I'm bonkers. But it's because I can see her ability to solve and think through problems and, you know, she pretty much runs our house. So I'm sure she could run a company and run cybersecurity, but it's the same thing, isn't it? And it's how do you kind of break through the barrier that it isn't just sitting clunking away at a keyboard?
Well, I was saying to one of my daughters, I reckon the best people for STEM and for technology are all our ballerinas, right? Like they show up 2-3 times a week for dance. They're super disciplined. They persist and persist and persist on a dance or a move. They laugh when it doesn't work. They show up for a concert and, you know, then race around or show up for a competition and then they race around to see themselves on the screen so they can figure out, you know, fast fail. They can figure out where things went wrong and how they can tune it for the next time they dance. Like if you just step back and think about those skills, right, and they're some of the best skills for technology.
Yeah,
it's
100%.
Creative.
Yeah.
It's thinking outside the square. It's persisting.
Yeah.
You know, it's failing on the things that, like, quickly moving on from the things that don't work and harnessing the things that do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, stakeholder engagement, right? Someone's paying a ticket to come and watch. If the stakeholder's not engaged, they're just wasted their money.
And working with your team.
Teamwork. Right? Yeah, there you go. We've solved it. Ballet's the way forward.
Ballerinas.
I guess we've touched on there another couple of interesting theme, which is you as a working parent. and you've been incredibly successful, and you found that balance. How have you managed to navigate that?
Wow. I think, first of all, it's something that you've got to keep revisiting. Like, there's no one answer.
Yeah.
I think I realized that pretty early on. Like, there's no, my child will be in daycare, or I'm going to be doing all the drop-offs. For me, it was always about just adjusting and thinking about what would work.
Yep.
I think that's number one. Number two, asking for help. I think it's okay to get help. Probably, I'm fortunate. I guess technology has offered me the opportunity to have flexible work, right? Long before COVID and long before working from home, I already had the opportunity to find ways in which I could negotiate with my employers around that flexibility. It's a fantastic field for that, because it allows you to work through and across, different time zones and different times, right? So I could do that. But I think that knowing that it is a problem that can be, I knew I could solve it, and the other thing is actually, and maybe I did this as I got more senior. I don't know the timing of it, but just having a little bit of the confidence to ask. Yep. I think often we think the answer will always be no. And I remember saying, there was a role, it was a really large role, and at the time, and my youngest daughter was about 5 or 6, and I actually felt like I couldn't do it. Like, in my mind, I just went, if I just think about this drop-off, that pick-up, all the logistics of life, I just don't know if I can do that role. And I went back and said, look, amazing opportunity, but actually I just don't think I can do this role.
Yeah.
And the question that came back to me, and maybe this is for employers as well, was what do you need? What needs to happen for you to be able to do this role? And I said, well, actually, maybe if I could do it in a 4-day, or if I could do it in a 9-day fortnight, or, and I mean, these are early days, right? Before we had as much conversation around hybrid and flexibility. And I'm talking like 10 to 12 or so years ago. So,
but it's interesting, because I think people think that post-COVID we invented flexible working. It definitely was a feature prior to it. You also got me on my favourite topic here, because I think what I hear too often is, what's your work? Is it 3-2, 4-1? And people talk about the days in and out the office.
Yes.
And they simplify it into this kind of numerical ratio. That's not flexibility.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not. It's what you've just described and articulated. It's flexibility. Is an organisation to come and someone that they can identify that has got the talent, the skills, the potential to do a really great job, and then saying to you, hey, here's the opportunity, and you saying, awesome, this is kind of what needs to happen for that to work for me too. And they've gone, great, let's make it work. That is flexibility in action. And I think it frustrates me when I see the headlines about, return to office call and or companies are shifting to 60% of the time in the office. That's not flexibility.
I think we're shifting the conversation away from outcomes.
That's right.
Right, because that doesn't necessarily achieve the outcomes that you're trying to drive.
Correct.
So then I think the question is, are we measuring the right things, right? And I mean, obviously we haven't done this long enough to have enough data at the moment, I think, around that. I feel like if we were just to put our history of 30 years of working, we would realise that eventually we will all get to the place where we recognise that those rules didn't make those organisations more productive or better.
No.
And I have a good mate. She does a lot of coaching of CIOs, and she often says that if you had unproductive people to begin with who weren't prepared to lean in and do something, the rule isn't going to change that, right? So, you're just addressing the wrong problem, or trying to get an outcome that you're not going to get.
Correct. Yeah.
And
interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I work. I'm relatively self-motivated, but I guess over the years I've learned that about myself. I'm pretty disciplined. I love taking initiative. So, and I think often also is that we need to look more at those capabilities. And particularly if we're trying to drive women into STEM, it's not always about the skills.
That's right.
You know, it's about the capabilities of someone who can lean in, step up, their ability to be curious, their ability to learn. I'll give you a story. We had a BA. She'd done some technology work, but largely her baseline was she came from a BA background, and she was working on an integration project as a BA. And that really raised her curiosity in wanting to do more integration development work.
Yep.
And so she applied for this job, and she said, you know, I'm at that point in my career where I'm deciding which way I want to lean, and I want to lean more technical. Now, for us, that was going to be probably a 6-month training ground before we really got her productive.
Yeah.
But today, you know, she's a great technical engineer, and she's a great asset to that team. And so, again, it's looking at, okay, but she may not necessarily have had all the skills, but did she have the capability to drive that? And I think if you've got the guts to say, I want to change my career, you're probably already demonstrating a level of motivation, you know, a level of self-confidence and direction.
I think it's also easier to achieve that if you remain within your organisation, because they know you.
Yes.
Right. They know what you're capable of. You've got a bit of a safety net, wriggle room, whatever you want to kind of call it. Whereas going to a new organisation and saying, you know, I now want to be this. Hang on a minute. Well, I don't know you.
Yes.
You haven't kind of got the, I don't know what the right is, the word credit in the bank, so to speak. That sounds a bit, you know what I mean? It sounds a bit brutal, but I think if you're going to make that transition, my advice to people is often try to do that within someone that you've already worked with or you're working with right now.
Oh, totally agree. And, you know, it's really interesting, but there are data points around this, right, that particularly internal jobs that technology puts out there, like even internal females aren't applying for it who potentially could.
Yeah.
And so maybe part of our leadership is that we need to ensure that we also create the conversation for our internal teams to be able to suggest or drive a direction where they can change their careers and they can learn something different or we can support them in making that change, and particularly if they're females. And I have seen it done successfully because I have done it myself in teams.
Well, it becomes, again, I'm kind of flippantly saying, you know, find that change within your current organisation, like it's that easy. It comes with other baggage, you know, it becomes with the fear of failure, an imposter syndrome, and numerous other things. And again, interestingly, if you look at the data, and I can't remember the exact statistic, but the number of people that get promoted within to CIO, for example, is very low. Companies would rather go external with that hire because they kind of know the skeletons in the closet for that person, right? They know the baggage. So they'd rather bring someone in. I'm not saying at a different level for the transition, that would be the case, but it kind of comes down to just having a genuine conversation about talent, potential, opportunity. Yes. And I think good leaders, they go looking for those diamonds in the rough. They look for the talent, they look for the spark that they can invest in those people. And that's not always easy when you've got a day job and everything else to do as well,
That's
right?
exactly right.
So it's a pretty complicated mix. What do you think? I'd love to get your views on what Trump's doing around diversity and inclusion and kind of like banning it and removing the funding and all this kind of stuff. Do you see that as having a negative or a positive impact in the long run?
I've actually I've been paying attention to it, but I'm waiting to see how it plays out, right? What I've liked is some of our leaders, particularly our female leaders here in Australia, who've expressed or have continued to support and express their support for the programs that they're interested in or the programs that they're seeing successfully run, i.e., you know, having more women in our ASX top 200, top 300, right? So for me, how does that impact locally, like in terms of our young people and our women? And it's not about women, actually. I'm going to step back. Diversity is about finding the best community of people to work on and solve problems, right? Yeah. So we know that when we bring a diverse series and set of ideas to the table, we actually get better outcomes.
Yeah.
Because it represents our community. At the end of the day, diversity is about bringing together voices that are representative of who we are.
Yes.
So if we only have one particular type of people, or people group or community, then we don't actually create and solve problems for the community. And ultimately, that's a financial and an economical problem, right?
Yes.
We know that impacts
Yep.
economics, it impacts companies,
Yep.
it impacts revenue,
Yep.
right? It impacts growth. So if we were to narrow it down and shift it away from people, I'd rather talk about the people problem.
Yep.
It makes no sense for organizations.
Of course.
Like, it's actually not a sensible organizational plan.
Yep.
So I think on a day-to-day basis at the moment, is it just a whole bunch of rhetoric?
Yep.
I'm not sure how that actually plays into what we do every day. I think it's early days. But I think that, as leaders, stepping away from the nonsensical conversation and focusing on what it is that we're solving for me, that's
Interesting.
That's the goal.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think there's two things. I think companies that weren't really committed to it gives them an excuse to walk away, right? And those that really are can double down now.
And also, and I don't have the answer for this actually, but because I've been mulling over this and percolating on it. Did people fully understand what it was? Because are we just now kind of, we're surfacing up all the people that ticked a box and went, yeah, that sounds interesting. And then they're like, oh, yeah, it's too hard basket, so this gives me, to your point, the out. Like, do we truly understand what it is we're trying to achieve? And the other thing is that, by the way, in any of these things, there's no perfect answer, right? Like, things have to evolve. And I think, people often say, well, quotas don't work. Quotas do work. This works. That doesn't work. If we were to just step back and go, like, all problems that we're trying to solve, we've got to try some stuff, we've got to fail some stuff, we've got to learn from it, and we've got to build on the things that work. If we were just to talk about that model, then whether it's DEI or any other problem that we're solving, that's just a journey we have to go on. And if it doesn't work in some instances, well, that's the lesson that's learned, right? Because nothing's going to follow like a straight path. We are going to have to make some choices, design some things, test them out. And if they don't work, then try some other things, right?
That's right.
From the things that we've designed and deployed and learned from. So
nothing works first time. And I think the other thing with diversity that always comes to my mind is, and I think this is how it's maybe misapplied in the last few years, is that just hiring a diverse workforce doesn't mean it's going to work.
Yes.
Right? As in, you've still got to invest in bringing people together, making sure that people have a voice, that they communicate, as in just saying, well, there you go, we've got one of everything, so to speak. That's not diversity in action. That's just ticking a box to say that you've done the right thing.
Yes.
And you're probably going to have more problems, actually.
Yeah, and then if you come back and complain about them.
Yeah, that's right.
You might want to have a look at whether you're working on the right problem.
Yeah, that's right. Alrighty, thank you for that. I've deviated miles off track, but I'm going to come back to your career. So out of university, I'm going to go back there now. Your first few years were as a management consultant. I think you worked for EY, KPMG, Oakden. It was kind of a really solid period there. What appealed to you about consulting?
I was really young then, right? Like, getting exposure to working with lots of different companies in different industries. And I think that idea of solving problems, like I was a highly curious person. So for me, there was lots of different types of problems to solve. And when you're a young consultant, you're doing lots of different things. You're not necessarily specializing in any particular, well, actually some people are, some people did. But I got to, work on just lots of different types of problems. I worked in the banking sector. I worked in airline. I did energy. So it was actually a really great exposure to different industries as well.
Do you think my theory on this is that you described it beautifully earlier, which is you go from high school to university, right? And that first step into halls is like a midway step between growing up and then you move into a house. Then you leave university, and if you go to something like consulting, it's almost like the fourth tier of education. Does that make sense? As you get exposure to many, many things.
Yes.
Very structured, very well organized. Everything. I'd imagine the training and onboarding is slick, it's elite. There's nothing left to chance there. You've got to work very, very hard, right? You put in long hours, long shifts, and it's a very probably selective group of people that they hire. But you're kind of well looked after and shaped. Is that a fair assessment?
Look, that was my experience. Yeah. I mean, I think it's changed a bit over time, hasn't it?
I'm not sure.
Or may or may not. That's a good point. That's exactly right. And you have a sort of a solid group of peers to learn from as well. You've often got buddies and what I really loved was the team environment. So, particularly I started in EY as a grad. And so, you're with a group of grads. Yeah. And not everybody, and, some people were hired in tax and some in those days, and some people were hired in audit. And so you had this sort of community of, of grads that you kind of learnt with, and grew up with. So for me, it was that community of...
It also becomes a comparison point, does it not? As in, you kind of know roughly where you ranked in the cohort-ish.
To be honest with you, I joined in New Zealand, so we didn't have a large cohort. Yeah. And in fact, I think there was only 6 people, 6 or 8. My number could be wrong when I was hired as a grad. Yeah. And 1 or 2 people specialised, and then we had some different things. And I'm talking management consulting. I mean, across the audit and tax and other parts of the business would have been different numbers, but I felt we had a solid group. Like we were quite a tight group. And actually there were 2 females. This is interesting, right, when we're talking about diversity, because, that's not bad. Of the 6 people that were hired, I think 2 of us were females. Yeah. 1 was a mature student, and then 3 people were from just different backgrounds. But my memory of it was like we were a really tight group of people. And we learned together. We went to the movies together.
That's great.
Yeah, we did like really weird stuff.
And that's kind of what I mean. It's almost like that was like your halls.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like or your house, as in you build that bond, you learn. I'm sure if you've had a bad day, you pick each other up. Yes. Or one of you has a success, you celebrate it as a group. And I think that's really important when you first come into work. And I love the model around management consulting for that reason. I think it's I don't want to use the word soft landing because you work bloody hard, right? And you graft and you're not there for anything but to work and to kind of get through that. But I just think it's a really, really sensible model to help people get ready for the workplace.
Yeah, and you're working hard, but you're working on things that, like you're working with a group of people in an environment that you, to your point, that you feel safe in, that you're protected in. So, and when you're young, like you've got not a lot of other commitments, right? It's not like, well, some people may have family actually, so I shouldn't take that off the table. But, my experience, our group, we didn't really have kids, we didn't have commitments. Most of us kind of either moved into share homes or went back home. Yeah. And so, it was a great training ground. And you get to work with, you get to see what good looks like because often you're working with some of the best of the best. Yes. And I certainly had that. Again, I'm speaking from my experience. I had some great, senior consultants, senior managers that I worked with on projects and, just to observe how they operated, how they treated people as well, how they developed people as leaders themselves, how they showed up to a stakeholder meeting, their method of communication. Like you could see the people that you could mirror yourself against in terms of the skills. So I think from that point of view as well, it gave me good insights into what good looked like for me as a leader as well.
Do you think that's kind of shaped aspects of what you are today?
It's certainly contributed. Like I've taken sort of different experiences from different leaders that I've seen. I think having my own startup has also contributed significantly because it's a different training ground again.
Of course.
And, that along with, definitely, like I think you observe and pick from some of the best people you work with. But for me, that was also coupled with just, my own training ground of being thrown in the deep end. And when I had my startup, I had 3 children, which is not a wise thing to do now that in hindsight. So, that in itself is a set of learnings that I think I've carried through for the rest of my career.
Yeah, interesting. Because I read that, I think it was after about 6 years, you kind of stepped away from the world of consulting. Big practice consulting, I would say, and you kind of started your own consultancy. And then I saw Rasberry. Tell me about, actually, we'll come to Rasberry. Tell me about the consulting first. So I think, and I encounter this a lot
Yep.
of kind of people that have worked as consultants or they've maybe worked in tech leadership roles. They kind of step away and they set up their own consultancies and they learn really quickly whether they're going to love it or hate it. And I think there's that blend between doing the work and the consulting and having to do the networking and the business development and the kind of building your own business book, so to speak. How did you find the balance of those things when you're suddenly out on your own?
Yeah, and being on my own was a bit of a convenience decision. Like I wanted to go back to work part-time and the environment was not set up for it at the time. So this was a way where I could go back and control my hours. I mean, it feels very simplistic now in hindsight, but really, I wanted to be around as a parent. I had, at that time I had 2 children and, but I still wanted to continue to invest in my career in whatever pace I could. And, life is seasoned, so it probably wasn't at the same pace as it is today.
Yeah.
But that was the mechanism by which I could do that.
Yeah, interesting. But it's not as simple as that, is it? And the reason I say that is my wife has her own business.
Yep.
And I watch her sitting at the kitchen bench, just her on her own. And she's still nicking out and doing school drops and messaging from the school saying, I forgot my shorts today, or rushing off and then off to netball. And then suddenly one of the kids is sick and laid up on the couch for 3 days feeling sorry for themselves. And she's still trying to do her business. And it just adds another pressure.
It's not, and I'm so glad you raised that because I think also we glamorize mompreneurs a little bit because we see the success stories. So often, but there is you're sitting in the school car park with your laptop while you're waiting for your kids to come out and then you're constantly balancing work, meetings, decision-making, and then the worst of it is admin.
Yes, yeah.
I think, I don't know about your wife, but admin is the biggest, running your own business.
Yeah.
The overhead of admin is, I think, the biggest killer.
Well, and it's tough because what I observe is that she'll do those things and then suddenly she'll say, oh my God, I haven't followed up with these people and I haven't done this and I haven't done this. And it's kind of like the metaphor being the one-man band, right? With the drum on the back and the cymbals on her ankles and kind of going around. But you're exactly right. We were just talking about this last week. She was laughing. There was a Facebook page and there was other kind of parents complaining about how difficult it is to do the school pickup and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, what are you talking about? I get there 45 minutes early with my laptop and I get the best spot, but I can work. And we're just, it's a mindset, right? You've got to live it and throw yourself into it, I think. Otherwise, you probably fail at both if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Parenting and trying to run your own business.
Well, what it does do is if you find the balance, it really extends your capacity, your resilience capacity, right? Yeah. So all of those skills, like how resilient you are, where your stress levers are, like you actually push the boundaries on those because you build the skills for, for resilience, for buoyancy, quick decision making. Like I can make decisions really quickly. I often think that one of the skills I did learn, and I'll be curious, you'll have to ask your wife this, but one of the lessons that I did learn, and to this day, it's certainly held, it's certainly a skill that I leverage to this day, is this idea of being able to balance the quick decision making, that hustle, versus the things that you're spending time on percolating.
Yeah.
Like some people percolate everything.
Yeah.
Some people make lots of quick decisions, but then, some things needed to be percolated. I think when you spend time in your own business, you learn a lot of skills. And one of those is you start to find that balance between where I'm hustling and where I'm pondering and percolating on a decision that has to be made. And that doesn't mean you've always made lots of good decisions. It means that you've just had the training ground that probably other people haven't had.
Yeah, interesting. And I think you're right. I think as well, take your experience where you've come away from some enormous organizations. You never probably had to send an invoice out to anybody or chase them for payment or reconcile your accounts, right, for the bookkeeper. It never even crossed your mind. but suddenly you're having to do all these new things as well. And it's very easy to be busy doing nothing.
Yeah.
If you're not careful.
And having because when you're first in the sales mode, you're taking every meeting because you're trying to sell something, right? Whatever that is as a resource. But then you realize, hang on, there's an 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
Like there's actually like the thing that's closest to being converted into a sale versus so you learn all of these things along the way.
Yeah, you're right. And it's funny, my wife always feels very uncomfortable with the term entrepreneur. She says, I'm a mum and I do this and I just make it all balance, as in that she doesn't like those kind of labels. Actually, interestingly, her business, she builds diversity programs in STEM. But that's a different conversation maybe for a different day. But let's talk about Raspberry. Tell me about Raspberry, because obviously I couldn't find anything on Raspberry.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like I was a bit early days in this, but Raspberry was like all around personalized stationery. So I had this creative side, and I wanted to find something that I could do, as a business that I could develop and run from home. Now, there's some naivety in this, by the way. I knew nothing about manufacturing and distribution. So that was a very hard and fast learning curve. Yeah.
So what did that teach you about yourself, that experience?
Actually gave me a lot of confidence in showing up and being able to, it's not convince, but take someone on a journey about, I guess, about my product and why they would value putting my product on their shelf. The other interesting thing was this was the days when manufacturers and distributors didn't directly sell to the public.
Okay.
And
got it, because because today you could probably do it through like an Etsy or Pinterest, I don't know. But you'd find a way.
You would retail your own brand, right? In those days, like I had a brand and people didn't retail their own brand, but I really needed the cash flow. So I created my own website. And I remember we had about 200 or so, maybe close to 300 online stores in those days.
Yeah.
Small businesses that retailed our product. And I remember, the retailers, the online stores that would come back and say, well, we don't want to carry your product because you're competing with me.
Of
course, today, everybody retails their own brand, right? They retail it at a retailer and then.
Well, it's even things today, you have an Instagram page, right?
Correct.
And you build that and you would, that makes sense. Yeah. But back then, it's funny, isn't it? It's what you were talking about with the payphone earlier. You forget where we've been sometimes and where we are today. And you not assume that it's always been the same, but it's easy to forget those things.
And also, I now, because I've owned my own business, no matter what job I do, I sort of treat it a little bit like my business. I'm solving a problem for my business. But more specifically, I have an intimate understanding about the challenges that customers have.
Yeah.
Because I've had to be in that mindset because you're so close to the customer. And I think what's fascinating is, in organizations and in consulting, et cetera, we talk about the customer journey and we talk about the customer experience, right? And the servicing layer that goes with that underpins that and supports that. But when it's your own business, you're super close to it. In fact, you're tweaking all parts of that value chain to drive the outcome.
Yeah, 100%.
So, and what I've learned through that is that there isn't just a customer journey.
Yeah.
There's a servicing layer that sits underneath it, right? That also has to be effective to drive that experience. And often, we will focus on the customer journey and the customer experience. But then if there's a whole heap of friction that sits behind how you pick and pack and how you stick it in an envelope or a box
100%.
to get it to the customer, and you're not solving for that, then you create friction by default into the customer journey.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's why when you look back at probably the 1970s, I'm going to say, in Japanese manufacturing, and they really mastered that. They mastered the operational efficiency of producing manufacturing. They weren't designing products that were more technology advanced than their competitors. They were just making them quicker, faster, cheaper, and therefore making a bigger profit or could sell at a lower cost. I think when I started in recruitment, I actually worked in automotive, and things like just-in-time and Kanban and Kaizen and Six Sigma were automotive terms that I was very familiar with. This is early 2000s.
Yeah.
And then I came into the world of technology recruitment, and everyone was using the same language. I thought, but you're not making cars. How does this apply? But the concept is the same, isn't it? And that's what you're talking about there, I think. The other observation I have, and it's interesting you talk about customer, one of my probably top five favorite quotes of all time is fall in love with your customer's problems, not your solution.
Oh, I like that.
And I don't know, I can't attribute it because I don't know where I heard it, but I've said it so often. But I think most startups fail with that. They love their solution. And right now I'm getting people pitching AI products to me like all over, every day, constantly. But all of them love their solution. They don't really take time to understand my problem, or where does that fit within my strategic priorities, or how would that affect the rest of my tech stack if I was to introduce this, or what other things would it create? It's like, but this is a really cool solution. It can do this for you. But where's my problem?
Yes.
And I think it was really interesting the way you articulated that, really getting close to the value for the customer. I think that's the understanding of the problem.
Yeah, because I think, for me, like, yes, I solve problems for organizations using technology, but my training ground has definitely come from solving problems for my own business.
Yeah.
Because, ultimately the goal of my business was to get product in the hands of customers. And I was close to that problem, right? That problem translates into dollars and cents.
After a few years, you stopped doing that and you went back into corporate.
I did.
How come?
I was never, like, how some people always want to be in startup world? And maybe it's different times too. Like this, being an entrepreneur and, being part of a founder community, that wasn't a thing when I was younger.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure it was a thing, but, it wasn't as...
the word side hustle hadn't been introduced
Yeah,
at that
that's
point.
right. I actually remember looking for like places where, startups where you could go to learn about marketing. You didn't necessarily have... accelerator programs, right? I remember when we were hunting for angel investors, like you're literally hunting. Like it wasn't that obvious. Whereas now, I think it's fantastic. Like a huge percentage of our economy is made up of small businesses, right? Which I love.
Actually, I think Jess did some research on this a few weeks ago. I think 98% of businesses in Australia are classified as small, medium, or something crazy. It's
literally,
enormous.
we're all startups.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, this interesting challenge came up, and I got a phone call to come and do a small piece of work, and it was literally when I was an independent consultant. I did a piece of work for an organization, and then years later, their executive is the person that rang and said, "Hey, I don't know what you're up to, but would you like to come back?" And it was an interesting time because I was wrapping my startup up, or I sold it at the time, and so I was kind of looking for the next thing, but I wasn't really sure what that next thing was.
That says a lot about you, just that moment, right? You've received a phone call from someone very senior in the business that's obviously got a problem and said, I know it's mentally gone through the Rolodex. I know someone that can fix this problem. And I think that's something when I'm advising young people around their careers is build that brand. Build the brand as someone that gets shit done.
Yep.
Right? That can take responsibility, own things, and see it through to a conclusion. Is that a fair assessment? Would you agree with me? Is that something you've experienced in your career?
Yeah, actually, my dad, he gave me two pieces of advice, so he'll be very proud. I've mentioned him now. One was, you don't ever want to look back and this was weird at the time when he said this, by the way. Our parents say weird things and then we get older and we're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. He says, just make sure however you behave in the corporate world, you don't want to look back and leave dead bodies behind. And I was like, that is just so weird. Like, who does that? And now in hindsight, I can reflect on what he means, right? That it's not success at all cost. Yeah. And the second one that he said was always live well, no matter what the circumstances.
Yeah.
Right? Because people will remember how you left. They'll probably forget what you did.
Yeah.
Right? Somewhere along the line, you've made some impact, but they will remember the way that you actually exited or left the organization.
Yeah.
And, they're things that I actually stick to today.
Yeah.
So I don't achieve success at all costs. That's just not how I enjoy doing work. And that doesn't mean that we don't have difficult days and we don't have difficult conversations.
Yeah, of course.
And we sometimes reflect back and go, oh, I wish I behaved better in that meeting, or I wish, I wish I wasn't as mad at someone, whatever those behaviors are, right? We're all human at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But also, when we leave, whether it's under good or not great circumstances, I think how you leave matters, because it reminds people of the work you've actually done, especially if you've done good work.
Look, 100%. I did a LinkedIn post about this last week, which was how to resign.
Okay.
Right, because it's one of my pet peeves is someone's, and I think people don't, this is a generalization, most people don't like conflict.
No.
And they feel very anxious. I've always said for years, I can tell when someone in my team's going to resign, because I get to the office, I'm normally one of the first to the office, and they're already there. It's like, well, they didn't sleep very well last night. They've got something to get off their chest, and they look a little bit anxious, and it's like they've got news for me. Yeah. It's always a tail sign, but I think just resign with grace. Do it in person.
Yeah.
It's not the time to give them a long list of all the terrible things about them or the business or why you're leaving. It's very simple. My journey here is done.
Yep.
I found another opportunity. Thank you very much. What do we now need to do to transition things? It doesn't need to be this big emotional. Even if you're very grateful to the person you're resigning from, that's not the moment.
Yes.
Just package the news.
Yep.
If you want to come back later and say, hey, there's some feedback I want to give you before I go, good, bad, or indifferent, do that in a couple of weeks. But that's not the moment.
Is it because we're older? The reason why I ask that is because, where am I trying to go with this?
We grew up in the good old days where
maybe we've realized that no place is perfect.
Yes.
That organizations are actually made up of people. And our executives and our leaders are people.
Yeah.
Right? And so they themselves are never, by default, they're not going to be perfect. And so, we've probably, I've as you've read my my career journey, I've worked in many different companies, and I can always reflect on the good in them, because they all have issues.
Of course.
Because organizations are organic in nature, and they're made up of lots of people trying to get lots of things done.
Is it that it's human nature, right? It's that kind of justification, I've made the right decision, or maybe self-esteem recovery. I don't know what it is, but when you walk away from something, it's always to try and tarnish the past a little bit. Not in everybody, but it's easier to look forward. The other interesting thing, you said, which I wanted to go back to, was you spoke about, we all have moments in our career where we don't handle ourselves very well, or the conversation didn't go well, or to plan, or went off track. Something I've learned to do in the last few years in particular is actually to go back to that person and acknowledge it and say to them, hey, I didn't handle that conversation very well. That's not what I meant, or that didn't come across right. And I just want to re-clarify that point with you, because I think you can have a do-over.
I absolutely agree with you.
And I think when I was younger in my career, I probably would have buried my head in the sand and thought, oh, well, it is what it is. Yep. Or maybe I didn't even think about it. You just kind of keep bumbling on and thinking, next time I'll do better. But learning the humility now to go back to people, and I find myself doing it probably too often, but I do go back to people, and I will now re-clarify with people. And it's interesting the way that people respond to that. I've had people say I didn't give it a second thought. Yeah. I've had other people to actually say, yeah, thank you, because that I didn't enjoy that conversation, or it didn't go very well. So
it's is it that golden ticket? Where they say you're handing over the golden ticket. You're just opening up the door for resolving. Because if you've impacted someone, right? Like sometimes I just think, oh, that conversation didn't go well. I wonder how they're feeling about it as well. Now, to your point, some people are like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, what do you mean it went badly? Yeah. But then if it didn't go as well for them, and you've now gone back and said, hey, look, actually I could have said that differently, or we could have had a different conversation. And they come back and say, oh, thank you. Like I was actually losing sleep over it, or I was pretty stressed about it. Like that's not an impact you want to leave on people's lives. And especially if you're a leader, that doesn't encourage someone to show up and be their best. If you've suddenly created a sense of stress, disharmony, so I love that. And I do that at home actually. Because, as a parent, there are times I'm like, man, I really wanted to have a better conversation around that.
Yeah.
And so, leaving the car empty right? Like I feel the fuel, and now I'm the person that has to now figure out I've got to get to. I could have had a better conversation around this.
Yeah.
And I've learned to go back because my kids are adults now, right? So you can't get away with poor grown-up behavior because they were little, and I've learned to go back and say, hey, look, like I was annoyed because I was in the car and I was really rushing.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I realised I had 7 kilometres worth of fuel.
Yeah.
And then, now I had to add an extra 10 or 15 minutes to my time that I didn't anticipate. So be it. That was like nothing was going to change around my circumstance on filling the car. So me being like nasty about it or sarcastic about it was not right.
Yes.
So I've learned to do that at home as well.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I read a book that was recommended to me not that long ago called Crucial Conversations. And it talked about that, how we have an emotional reaction to a situation. And then the emotional reaction is probably triggered by the story that we're telling ourselves about what's going on, and maybe not the facts of what's actually going on. And if we take a step back and we tell a different story, we may react differently in those situations. And it kind of encourages you to think, well, what other story could be going on here that I'm not thinking about? Let me try a different story, or go and ask, what's the story?
Yeah.
But it's to your point. Yeah, you do get do-overs. You can go back and have conversations.
I think it's good for your own soul. Don't you reckon? It's good for you as well.
I think so, because I think personally, I know that I can be quite. I do worry about these things. I will have a conversation with someone, and I will go home that night and think, why did I say that in that way, or why did I make that flippant comment? That's not how I feel about the situation. I've allowed something to affect that, and it does make you feel very fulfilled or good about yourself.
Yeah.
And I think leadership is a responsibility that. I think I didn't realize that when I was younger in my career. I'd look at leaders and think, God, they've got themselves to this position through tenure or time served or experience or whatever it is. But you don't necessarily realize the burden. And I don't want to get political with this next statement, but I remember watching Daniel Andrews getting interrogated by the press every single day. Whether you think Dan Andrews was effective in his job or not, it doesn't really matter for the context of this. But I used to just think, who in the world wants his job right now?
Yeah.
Right. He wants to have to stand there and talk about a global virus where no one's got any of the information, having to make decisions to protect people, but not protect people. And then after he gives that announcement, he spends probably 3 hours with the press nitpicking over every single sentence that he's just said. Publicly, he has to stand there and take those questions. How that guy kept his cool is beyond me through those things. And that's the burden of leadership. It's but that comes with the territory. If that's what you aspire to become, accept that you've also got to wear it and live it every single day.
Yeah. Do you think that our knowledge and understanding about what is acceptable behavior in leadership has changed as well, like compared to maybe 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think it has. And it's interesting because something that's going through my mind earlier, we were talking about like the 4-5 and the flexibility and all this kind of stuff. So the 4-1 and the flexibility was that I think one of the things that as a leader or a manager of people that you didn't have to worry about 15, 20 years ago was people rocked up at 9 o'clock or 8:30 and they worked till 5:30 and they went home. They didn't have smartphones. They weren't looking at their emails on the evenings and weekends, and they had their weekend and they came back to work and they worked for their 40 hours, right? And your job was to make them, support them to be effective in that time frame. That's all blown up, right?
Yes.
Not just because of flexible working, but now right to disconnect and email communication through weekends and messaging and all this kind of stuff. But I think as a result, leadership's had to change, because I think the job of a leader when it's a 40-hour week in person in an office, you're trying to drive productivity and get results. But you've got to now think bigger and different to that. And I think that probably authenticity and vulnerability is now much more accepted for the right reasons, by the way, in leaders.
No, I definitely agree with you. I've certainly, we've been around for a while now.
Yeah.
I'd say I've been in the workforce formally for 30 years. So, we've seen a lot of change in 30 years.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to sound like a dinosaur, and I do say this way too often, but when I first came into recruitment, I'd never been on the internet.
Yeah, no.
And I'd never sent an email.
I had email.
So this was February 2000, right? And didn't have a Hotmail or a Gmail or whatever.
I had Lotus Notes That was my first.
There you go.
Remember Lotus Notes and the knowledge bases?
Yeah.
The Lotus Notes knowledge database.
Yeah. So we've seen an enormous amount of change.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's the thing, I think that everybody's trying to keep up with that change and expectations of that change. And then everybody's now got different global views and different impacts. But what hasn't changed, and I heard this spoken about, maybe about 10 years or so ago when I was studying for my master's, and it was the concept that leadership is defined by followship.
Oh, interesting.
So you're only a leader if people want to follow you. And I don't think that's changed. It doesn't matter in any historic context. And it's something that goes through my mind.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
Constantly, is my job as a leader isn't to turn up and to make people feel intimidated and ashamed and, this is the job that I expect you to do type thing. It's to help people, to enable them to be able to contribute to what we're trying to do to move the business forward. And that just takes a different thought process, I think.
So I know this is your podcast, can I ask you a question on that?
I feel slightly intimidated, but yeah, go for it.
Because I've been mulling over this as well, right? Like, I completely agree with you. Like, I think the role of a leader is to help take everybody on the journey, right? So when the tide rises, we all succeed together, right? When the tide goes down, we all go down with it together. Like, we're working together, right? Yeah. And to allow people to have the autonomy to be their best in that. My question for you is, like, when we're younger, and now I'm highly curious, right? So I read a lot of books and I listen to podcasts, and I also still invest in my own professional development.
Yeah.
But that's because I'm just interested in learning lots of different things.
Yeah.
Good or bad. But as we get old, when we're younger, we're doing lots of courses, we're attending negotiation skills training and this and that. And, you could list all the certificates you got, right? And then as we get older, and I see this, and I often ask my peers this question as well, as we get older, we participate in less of those things.
Interesting.
And then when we get to an executive level, we almost don't do it at all. And so if we've just discussed that leadership has changed and it is changing and how we lead is changing, then how are we getting those new ideas?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, I guess what you just described, though, is that the new ideas, we don't need to know those new ideas necessarily.
Right. So what you're saying is that
our job is to enable people.
Yes.
Is to enable the next generation to go and find those ideas.
No, I mean in leadership though. Like if we
new ideas in leadership.
Yeah, if we've got particular patterns, right? So if you've come from a pattern of being intimidating, or this was my model of leadership, and leadership has evolved and changed.
Yeah.
Then you have to invest in maybe like reflecting on or learning or obtaining different skills.
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
I think so. Yes, sorry, you're right.
We find less time for it when we actually probably need it the most. It's probably where I'm going.
But maybe that's building upon the structured learning that we've had.
Yeah.
And that is listening to podcasts and finding, I listen to the High Performance podcast, and I love listening to the different ways that they'll talk about the way they're effective in their leadership, or Adam Grant's podcast where he'll bring on people and talk about organizational psychology and organizational change. And maybe that's the layering on top of the kind of foundational bits and pieces where we started. What I don't know, and I was thinking about as you were talking, is do those kind of leadership classes still exist today?
No.
For the next generation of leaders, how are they being developed?
Yeah, interesting.
And through those kind of business schools or through structured learning, structured workplace learning.
Well, we have so much more access to different forms of learning now, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Like you rightly pointed out. I mean, podcast is probably a massive learning input for me, and lots of different ones. Like I'm not specifically doing just a leadership one, I'm really curious about. I like the Big Ideas podcast. Yeah. By ABC.
Yeah.
And really because it's just tackling different topics that I think. I have those aha moments as I listen to some of the different topics that they're exploring.
Yeah.
So
I think it's also interesting to find people that you maybe admire, or people that you can see are in a business where they're doing something different. I've recently become quite close with someone that's building a cybersecurity business, and we've actually diarised. We have a fortnightly catch up, on a Friday, and we just talk. We talk about, he's built and sold 3 businesses in the past. He's got different experience in a different world to myself, but we'll just talk about what we're doing to drive our businesses, to grow them, around leading the team, just different things. We just have a fairly open conversation, and we're probably hopefully he's learning as much as I am from those conversations too. But I think that's another aspect too. And probably the 5 words my team most dread hearing from me, by the way, is I just read a book. Because there's some crazy new idea that's coming that I've kind of read and I'm playing with. But I'm also a big believer that the best way to learn is to teach.
Yes.
And if I kind of encounter a new idea and I'm playing with it in my mind, bringing it to the team and saying, hey, let's play with this. Let's I think this could be really valuable. Let's test it. And I'm a big believer in something you talked about earlier, which is kind of test, but not be afraid of that failing.
Yes.
And fail fast or we tried that wasn't right. It's not giving us the results. Let's park it. Let's move on and do something different as well. But yeah, it's very hard to imagine what the future of leadership will look like because we just don't know what that world looks like. One of my big bugbears at the moment is the criticism that Gen Z gets. Because I only ever hear really negative connotations, as in, they don't want to commit to things. They're quite flighty. They expect quick progression. They expect that it's nothing really positive apart from tech savvy. And my joke is, it's because they know how to put like a Snapchat filter on something. That's like a bit of a passive aggressive. But to me, it's a form of ageism because you're classifying a group by their age and saying that they've got these traits. That's not good. It's not a good thing. So why are we not leaning into that and saying there's a huge amount of potential in the next generation of people that are coming through, and how do we learn from that, and how do we lean into that to develop the next I don't know, future of businesses and teams? I don't know.
Well, I'm raising Gen Zs.
Yeah, so am I.
Yeah, I have 3 of them in my house, and they have their group of Gen Z friends. Like, I'm learning a lot from Gen Zs. To be honest with you, I'm not, and maybe, first of all, I'm a bit of an optimist, so I will always see the positive in everything.
Yeah.
I'm not really connecting to this Gen Zs don't show up and Gen Zs don't do this and they don't do that. I think they're showing up differently.
Yep.
I think we have a bias for how we've showed up. And so, they, first of all, what I admire is their conscientiousness for the environment, for people, for community. Not that we didn't have that, but I feel like they've got that in spades.
Yeah.
Like they have a real heightened awareness, maybe a little bit naive. And I'll have a story. So my daughter took my credit card to go to the supermarket for a bit of supermarket shopping. And then suddenly there was like $50 worth of cleaning products in my house, which unbeknownst to me, we needed $50 or so worth of cleaning products. And I realized like she literally replaced all of our cleaning products with reusable bottles and, all sorts of interesting things. Now, initially I was like, wow, like $50. That's a lot of money. Yeah. Right? Of course, now it's actually paid itself off.
Yeah.
And we're not filling our yellow bin with lots of cleaning product bottles. And so I found that like when I think about now what are the skills? What is the thought process? Like what are the learnings that she's had? Right? Those are not a lazy Gen Z. They're not interested. They can't be bothered. They haven't thought things through. That's just they've thought about something differently.
Yeah.
And I'm giving a really small and very simplistic example, but maybe we're not getting the best out of them because we're putting a lens on this problem differently to how they are thinking about things.
Yeah, I completely agree. I went to an event, not sure if I should say this, but with LinkedIn, and it wasn't LinkedIn talking about this, but the topic was what challenges are you finding with engaging and retaining and hiring Gen Z talent? And I just sat there mortified. I thought, why are we looking at the problem here? Why are we not looking at the opportunity or what that could look like? And it just seemed quite narrow-minded in my opinion. And you're right. I've got a house. I think our youngest is about to turn 13. My son's about to turn 16. We've got one in the middle. So, but I'm sure our parents felt the same about us.
Yeah, totally.
And the difference is that you in the mid-90s, you didn't have TikTok and you didn't have Instagram, this is kind of what I touched on earlier. Your awareness of the world beyond New Zealand was probably relatively limited. You didn't think that at the time. You probably thought you were very worldly wise. But it's interesting that you gravitated to wanting to work at the airport, which tells me somewhere you wanted to escape. But that's a different podcast conversation,
adventures,
probably. Adventures. But it's nonetheless interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, what would we have been like if we had this awareness of the world and we could realize, hey, I can put a backpack on and I can go off around to this part of the world and I can go and do this and I can go and see these things and I can get a job in San Francisco. I never would have ever dreamt of that stuff when I was at 16, 17.
Totally.
It's completely alien. Whereas what we've done is we've opened a world of opportunity to people, but now we want to kind of constrain it in the way that we were brought up.
Yeah, and even just how we've been having interesting conversations at home about how you invest your money. And so, traditionally it was like you go buy a house, you save up, right? You start work and then you save up and then you save up for your deposit and then you buy a house and so forth and so forth, right? Like we had this structured sort of, everyone seemed to be doing this structured path. That's not how they're thinking about investing their money.
No.
Right? Why? Because, so with my kids, they're investing in shares and ETFs at the moment.
Yeah, wow.
Now, the reason why we didn't do it was, one, we couldn't afford it, right? It wasn't that accessible and that easy. You needed a minimum of, I don't know how many thousands of dollars to get in. Today, you can download an app. It costs you $5. Yeah, if you're on an app that has 10 ETFs and it's costing you $5, so be it. 2 of those are probably a global one.
Yeah.
So, again, if we put our lens on it, we're going to think about the problem from our perspective.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Because that's what we had access to. They have access to, I can pay ID my money into my investment account. And within minutes, I can buy these ETFs that I'm interested in. I can Google and get a raft of information about it. In fact, I can ChatGPT it and it'll tell me all about this ETF and everything I need to know for the last 10 years. So they just have, I think we've got to look at it differently.
I completely agree. Yeah. My only footnote on that is that my mother-in-law is trying to get me to buy into crypto at the moment. So I don't know what that...
I'm like your mother.
I don't know that's she's got involved, but she's trying to convince me that I should do the same, but that blows my mind.
I love that.
Yeah. So we've gone so far off track, but this is so awesome. I wanted to talk about when you joined NAB.
Okay.
And then Aus Post, which when I was kind of putting your career into eras, this was your client-side corporate era.
This was.
So I guess what I'm always interested in is they're just big machines, right? These businesses, right? They're absolutely enormous. So how do you make, let me rephrase that. How are you successful when you work in an organization on that scale?
So spot on, right? And I must have been so naive, going into that organization, especially in the role that I was in, because I'd come out of owning my own small business. So I think partly, I have definitely I'm a natural optimist.
Yeah.
And I do believe that does help. I often see things with a positive lens. So, we talked about the Gen Zs. I'm like, they're annoying sometimes, but, generally so are we. Yeah. So for me, that's probably the lens that I would have applied on it. And interestingly, I come across people who have worked in banking for a long time, or they've gone in and out of banking or worked for the different banks, right, as you do. And they all have not all. There's always a negative, I didn't enjoy the culture, I didn't like this or didn't like that. And I'm sure I was in situations where I didn't enjoy that day at work or that, that project or those people. But every time I've reflected on it, I've actually really enjoyed working there.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the people I worked with. I enjoyed the stuff I got to do. Not all the time, but that's just life.
Yeah.
And maybe because I'm a bit of an optimist as well. Yeah. And partly, I've got the horses that are roaming around Melbourne City and they've got their little blinkers on.
Yeah.
I just wonder if I've got a few little blinkers that kind of protect me from, the things within an organization that can suck you in and actually frustrate you or, bring you, sort of really bring you down and play on your confidence. That's my first one. But my second one probably is I didn't work there for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm often there to, I find in my experience, and again, I'm reflecting on a career now, looking backwards, I came to solve a problem. I rolled my sleeves up. I got involved and I got stuff done.
Yeah.
And then there was a point in time when I felt like I'd finished.
Yeah.
And then I went on to the next thing.
Do you know what? And I think it's a trend that I see when I talk to people in technology is that it's a career that's bookmarked with projects and transformations largely for most people, or you're kind of going from one release to another or this transfer, whatever it is. So it does give people a perfect opportunity to kind of say, right, have I got the energy to go again here? Or do I want to go and do this somewhere else? And I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think if you worked as an accountant or in a law firm, you probably wouldn't get the same kind of punctuation points between moments in your career.
Absolutely. And I'm not an I think that's the other thing is learning early where you are best, right? I'm not an operations girl. Yeah. I'm not going to run your tech for you, but I'm absolutely going to be very happy to roll my sleeves up and help you improve it.
Yeah, right? Interesting.
So I've learned that about myself. And maybe I learned that about myself through my business. And maybe that's why my business reached a point in time where it was like, do I really want to be doing invoices forever?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm definitely a builder.
Yeah.
I like building teams. I like seeing a group of people come together and do something and achieve something and drive an outcome. And that's my success. I know that's what my strength is. And because I know it's doable, I know you can build high-performing teams. I know that is possible. I know you can enable organizations to harness and deliver what is possible.
Yeah.
And so that's where my bench strength is.
It also takes a great deal of abstract thought, because you need to be able to picture something that doesn't exist in your eye, and then in your mind's eye, and then get other people to be able to see that and then bring it to life.
And take them on that journey, right?
Yeah.
But at a pragmatic level.
Yeah.
Right? So, I think if you're trying to build a rocket ship to Mars, that's a far longer journey than if you're helping an organization, get to the moon. Because we've landed on the moon, right? We know it's possible. We know it's doable. So to me, a little bit of it is having the hustle, but having the ability to think through what is pragmatic and what is possible as you drive that change.
Yeah.
And I think often when I see or when I'm engaged in a problem where organizations have tried to do things and they've invested a lot of money and they've failed, it's because people did picture something really incredible, but it wasn't probably practical or pragmatic or doable, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying pragmatic such that you don't drive transformative change.
Yeah.
But you have to drive it in a way that enables the organization to change and to achieve its outcomes. So coming back to being outcomes focused, right? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And what are the things that are really important? What are the solution levers that you're going to pull to drive that change? So it's about picturing what is possible in that context.
Yeah, 100%. Look, and I think what was going through my head as you giving that explanation is it kind of goes back to that quote from earlier, right? Fall in love with your customers' problems, not your solutions. Yeah. As in, people can dream big with this incredible solution, but if it doesn't fundamentally solve the day-to-day problems of people, it's not going to stick.
Yes.
People will resist it and kind of, well, hang on a minute, that you've just given me a different set of problems. Why would I now master those? Yeah. I'll keep dealing with what I've got in front of me. Look, there's a few other roles through that. You went to UniSuper, I think you went to HESTA, and then you went to Sisu.
Yes.
I'll call it Sisu. Actually, I came across those. I had a conversation with them about doing some hiring at one point because they're owned by Wesfarmers or acquired by Wesfarmers. Yes. And I remember I was talking to the guy about the blood pressure machines in the chemist. Is that right? Have I got the right company?
In the Priceline, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Through those different roles and so forth, Is that where you think you're at your best, when you're kind of overseeing like the enterprise strategy and vision and affecting that change? Is that when you're really happiest at work?
Yes. And I think I'm good at it because I'm prepared to roll my sleeves up a little bit, right? So
Yeah, okay.
I think in every leadership role, you can't just lead. We lead from the front. We set the vision. But sometimes you just got to roll your sleeves up and get in amongst the rough. And maybe that's the part I like. Like you can't just upward manage the problem and the solution. You actually have to, get involved with your teams. You've got to have a level of rolling up your sleeves. And I think that is what makes it interesting for me. Yeah.
And in your career, you've come full circle. So you're now with Cognizant.
I am.
So you've kind of started in consulting, you've gone to startup, you've gone to corporate, you've kind of then gone out on your own, and then you've kind of come back to Cognizant. Are you back in your happy place now?
I am, because I think that we talk about leaders having difficult jobs. I think our CIOs have difficult jobs. I think, our CIOs they're not tech leaders, they're business leaders, right? They are such a critical part of the executive in driving that change to allow organizations to achieve their outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that today it's not, we used to, I don't know if you remember the days where it was like the business, we're doing this with the business and the business will tell us what tech they want. I think we're an organization, we're driving change, we're driving outcomes, and technology is a critical part of that outcome. And so, and then now we've got cybersecurity as a fundamental part of, the health and well-being and reputation of an organization. We've got people that need to be taken care of as a part of that, and particularly with the cybersecurity and data complexities that organizations have to manage. So for me, when I think about my colleagues and my peers, like their jobs are really hard.
Do you think the role of CIO will get deconstructed?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? Like you need someone to hold that vision. Like I think you need a person that understands, that is holding the IT strategy or the technology strategy or the business technology strategy, whatever we want to, and the roadmap to get there, and understands what it takes to bring partners, bring teams, bring their other peers and leaders on the journey to drive that change. I actually think you still need a person.
Interesting. Do you think...
or you need...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's now
Or I haven't pondered it.
I wonder if it's now the second most important job in a business after CEO. For that reason. Most companies are driven by technology, or there's some huge technology enablement within their business.
Do you think CFO as well in that partnership?
Maybe. I think, again, there's some kind of competing forces within that. But it's interesting when I talk with CIOs and they're suddenly expected to be an expert in cybersecurity. Then now it's AI.
Yeah.
Then it's data. Then it's the kind of the keep the lights on BAU network infrastructure part of their business as well. It's enormous. It's an enormous amount of responsibility and such a range of different understandings. It's interesting. I'm seeing more and more transformation being delivered by the chief customer officer and COO at the moment. Seems to be a huge trend. Maybe that was always the case, and I'm more alert to it now. But it seems like that's coming away from the CIO increasingly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see that there's a tight partnership between the COO and the CIO, right? Because ultimately, like organizations are trying to drive operational efficiency and operational resilience. And so, if your COO is overseeing that, then they're a tight partner with the CIO. Yeah. And it ultimately also is by industry, right? Different industries have different roles that will be a partner with a COO, right? So if you're much more of an operational, manufacturing distribution type industry, then, you've got the COO's role is so much more complex and broad ranging as well.
That's true.
For me, because of my bench strength is in that strategy and execution. And so I think my next round of my career, this next part, this next journey, this next era or phase, I really want to partner with them to see them be successful. I want our CIOs, I want our organizational leaders to be successful in the change. Yeah. And I think that, certainly when I was in roles where I had to make change, how we brought teams and partners and people together to make that change was really important. And how we created the partnerships, right, whether it's internal or external stakeholders and partners, was really important. So I guess now I'm just sitting on the other side because I want to see that change happen at scale.
Yeah.
And I want to see us be more successful at it. You know, we have experienced far too many high investment projects that haven't quite achieved the outcomes, but I actually think they can, and they should be able to.
Well, I think if you look at the track record in most projects, more than 50% are deemed a failure, right? That's
We're still at that rate?
Depends who's giving you the statistic and what their measure of failure is.
Yes, that's true.
I talked about this a couple of episodes ago with Fatima Abuchi, if you know Fatima.
Yes.
And we talked about why do projects fail, and is it because it doesn't give what the stakeholder wanted? Is it because it's over budget? Is it because it's late? There's numerous reasons, right? The success is that it fundamentally, in my opinion, it fundamentally changes the business and moves it towards its strategic goals. Right. If it does that and it cost a bit more money or was a little bit late or it changed along the way, does that matter? If it's still moving the business closer towards what it's trying to achieve.
I think the issue comes when it isn't doing that and you're investing.
That's the problem, yeah.
And I think the part that's missing is the ways of working, right? Like actually how we drive that change and how the organization works to drive that change is critically as important as the change itself.
Yeah.
And so for me, like transformation programs can't be in isolation of what the rest of the organization is trying to do.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. They have to be embedded in the fabric of what they're doing. That's right. Because the transformation is the change, right? It's not that, whose model was it? Was it Kirkpatrick? The kind of freeze, unfreeze change model. I don't think it was Kirkpatrick. I forget the name now. But I don't think that's realistic in the modern world that we work in.
No, I agree. And, then it's connecting everybody to that story and being consistent. But the other one is persistence. Do you think persisting plays a role? Like sometimes we go through these budget cycles and then, we start to take money out or we're not quite committed to it as much as we were. And I don't know, the change requires a bit of persistence. Like there's that foundational change and then the continuous evolution of improving it and tuning it and learning from the things that work.
Yeah.
Getting rid of the things that don't work and investing more in
100%.
the evolution.
I've given you one of my favorite quotes. One of my other favorite quotes is nothing or nobody ever drifted towards greatness.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen by luck or by chance. You don't just drift and you float and you get there. It gets there because you have persistence, consistency, resilience, all those things to kind of get through the barriers that are inevitable along the way.
And as leaders, I think we're learning that is equally an important part of the success.
Yes, yeah, definitely is. That's right. Yeah, there you go. That's profound. That's deep. All right, we're gonna mix it up. I didn't warn you about this.
You did. Oh, did you warn me about the mixing it up?
No, I don't think so. We're gonna do lightning round.
Oh, quick word answer thing.
Kind of. So I'm gonna ask you to spread these out.
You didn't give me this. This is like Trivial Pursuit.
It's not
like
quite.
Tuesday
We have
night.
talked about doing Titan trivia, right? Because we figured you're all quite competitive, and that could make an interesting episode if we. So pick 3.
Okay.
And then flip them over, read the question, and give us your answer.
Oh wow. Okay.
It's trivia about you, so you can't get it wrong.
Hopefully, it's like. Do I just pick one at a time?
Yeah, do whatever you want.
I'll
Yeah.
pick one at a time. Coffee or tea? Oh,
See,
definitely
they're
coffee.
easy. They're easy.
Coffee, definitely coffee, but I do love tea, like at night or
What's your go-to tea?
My go-to tea at the moment is sencha tea, but that's because I was recently in Japan and we bought all this sencha tea or maybe stole it from the amenities stash at the hotel. So now I've got to finish drinking.
Okay. What do you got next?
It's age. It's an age thing, I reckon. I do love a good coffee. Okay. At what time of day do you get your best work done? In the morning. So this is a habit I learned between 5:30 to 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, wow.
I can smash out an incredible amount of work and ideas.
It's interesting.
And I think it started when I had my own business and I had to run hard before the kids got up and I had school drop off and so anything creative or interesting that I needed to get done, I scheduled at that time.
Interesting.
And I still do that today.
It's funny what we learn about ourselves. And again, it goes back to flexibility. It's very, very infrequent I'll work on the weekend. But when I do, I'm hyper productive because I realize that I'm clearing things without getting responses as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As in, it's one-way traffic.
Yep.
I'm just ticking things off, sent, and I can worry about the rest Monday. But I find that in the midst of a normal working day, as you're actioning things, stuff's coming back, right? It's a back and forth exchange. So
Yes.
you kind of never really. It's like a big game of business table tennis. Like the ball's coming back at you as quick as you can hit it.
My last one, right?
Last one.
Three. Okay, if you could change one thing about your oh man, I knew I'd get a hard one. What would it be? One thing about my industry. Can I do two things?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
More than one? Look, one I think is, and it's why I've sort of moved back into consulting, is I want to see us be successful. Like in partnering with our leadership peers and driving that change that ultimately benefits employees, benefits customers, benefits the organization, whatever the goals are of the organization. Like I'm super passionate that we can get that done, and we should, right? And bring to life modernized technologies to drive that change. So that's my one thing.
Yeah.
My second one is I don't like the awards.
Okay. Interesting.
Because we don't and I shouldn't name an award, but CIO of the year or whatever those awards are, because like you've got people that you mentioned this person that you're spending time with as you're growing your business and you can share. Like I have a group of people that I spend time with, and they serve different roles, right? They bring different skills to the table, and I'll ring them up and bounce ideas with them. And we'll have this exchange of ideas, or we'll have a dinner once a month, and they bring such a wealth of insight to me, and I'm hoping vice versa. They're not the people that are applying to win awards.
Yeah.
But I think they're the people we need to elevate.
Interesting.
And I want to, how do we elevate people that are not going to spend hours trying to fill in nomination forms for awards? How do we get them out there so they are the people whose voices are being heard, who we can learn from, who are doing incredible things and with different circumstances, right? Different types of budgets, different challenges,
100%.
different organizations.
Look, I'm open to guest recommendations.
Okay.
I'll
send you a list.
Yeah, send me a list. Let's get them on. Let's get them to come and tell their story. I think, that's one of the reasons we wanted to put this podcast together. It was always when Hayley, Jess and I were putting our heads together around this, I get to meet so many great people like yourself in my job. And how do we bring that story to life and give the world an insight into some of your experiences and the journey that you've been on? Because most people don't see that. They see you on LinkedIn and they see you're successful and your track record, but they don't know the bit underneath it. They don't know that you're sitting there with a 7-seater car full of girls on the way to ballet, kind of quizzing why they think they're very good at maths. But it's all that stuff. That's how we get the story out, I think.
Yeah, amazing.
So yeah, very open to recommendations.
Excellent. I'll send you a list.
I've got a couple more questions.
Oh, there's more?
Okay. Punchy ones again.
Yeah.
Punchy ones, right. Do you have any career regrets?
Do I have career regrets? No, I don't think I do, actually. Is that my optimism coming out?
Yeah, probably.
I'm going
to rephrase it. We regret the things that we didn't do. So what haven't you done in your career that you regret?
What haven't I done? Probably more global work. Like I've done a lot of work locally.
Yeah.
And, there were one or two opportunities that I had. But everything has a cause and an effect, yeah?
Yeah.
And the effect of that is that I did enjoy raising my kids. Not all the time. And still not all the time. But overall, I love my experiences with them, especially now that they're older, and what I'm learning from them. So maybe what I would regret in life is not investing in my learning and my curiosity. Yeah. And what I may have missed out on through my career, I've certainly learned from them.
Yeah.
So, and
that's a good answer. That's right. It's good it's good to not have regrets, I think, as in, but I think the global thing does come up more often than not when I talk to people, as in, maybe I could have gone to Europe, or I could have gone to the US or to Asia and seen and done something different. I think that comes up, but that's not always possible, not always achievable for people.
See, I reckon if I was a Gen Z now, like what's the generation before Z? Are they the Alpha? No, the Alphas are now, aren't they?
Alphas now, millennials.
Millennials. That's it. Oh, because millennials are, okay, maybe the millennials. See, if I was are the millennials being, maybe it's the younger millennials. They're the digital nomads, right?
Yeah.
See, I reckon if I was part of the younger millennial group, I probably would have been a digital nomad.
Yeah. You'd be in Bali now or something.
I would be sitting in Portugal somewhere, I'm sure it's not as interesting, right? Because you're working at 2 a.m. in the morning. So everyone who's taking their photos going, look at me. I'm sitting here by a beach working at a cafe, but I reckon that's at like 3 a.m.
Well, there's a huge expectation versus reality, isn't there?
Correct.
Within that, there's upsides and downsides, and to kind of everything we do as well.
Yeah. But I think that's what I could have done. But anyway, I honestly don't have any. There's still time.
That's right.
There might be still time. This is true. Yeah. This is true. You never know. Maybe in like 10 years' time, I'll be in
the Maldives doing this. Yeah.
I'll send you a text.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. What are you most proud of in your career?
The people that I have journeyed with along the way.
Yeah.
Like I'm a collector of people. Possibly if I had space, I'd be a collector of pets as well. But I'm a collector of people. It was so funny. I had my 50th birthday, and I invited like a whole group of people. I had some drinks. I had a family dinner, and then I had some drinks. And I invited people that were in my network to these drinks, partly because they contribute like to my life skills and life learning, right? And so one of the people that came, we started working together at NAB.
Yeah, right.
And we've worked together at NAB, we've worked together at Aus Post. Like our careers have we've worked together, and then when we're not working together, we catch up sort of, periodically to share life stories and so my greatest joy actually with my dad's advice on not leaving dead bodies behind and leaving well is that I have this collection of people that are friends, but they're like colleagues.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be hanging out with them for dinner every Saturday night, but they're people that I can ring and have a coffee with and share life experiences with, but also, discuss things around work and be challenged on things. And for me, like, yes, I've done some great roles across different organizations. I mean, one of my most memorable roles is working at HESTA.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, what we did there and some of the people I got to work with there, and that the opportunity as a whole. And NAB as well. I mean, it was a massive training ground coming out on the back of my own business. But overall, if I get rid of the companies and the, and the big roles that I've had, it's really the people.
Here's a controversial question.
Yeah.
In more of a remote or hybrid working, would you have built the same depth of connection?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, because I actually built a few of those, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Like a whole bunch of my team joined as a part of during COVID.
Yeah.
And some of those people, I still actually, in fact, I broadened my network more differently, in a different way.
Yeah.
Because I was invited to do a few conferences, like speaking in conferences, which is a challenge I took on as well, because it's not something I actually enjoy naturally. Even though I'm an extrovert, it's not something I say yes to easily, and it's one of the things I've challenged myself. And I got to do these conferences like across the world, like because I didn't have to travel.
Yeah.
And so, as a part of that, like I ended up with a bunch of people that I still connect with, message, I went on a holiday or partly work to Singapore, and I caught up with people that I'd met because, I spoke at this conference.
You're basically Gen Z, aren't you? Yeah. That's what you're saying. Like,
I love Gen Z.
That's right.
I just need my backpack and send me to Portugal. Honestly. It's something that I've had to challenge myself. It's really hard when you're a parent and you're building your career and you're raising children, because it's the last thing that you want to be doing on a Thursday evening, but it's something that I've really made an effort to invest in as my kids have gotten older. So I do recognize this is the season. I'm in a different season of life.
Yeah.
And more so, you know, what I'm talking about is more recent, right? Last couple of years. But and I've also started to try and reconnect with people that had an impact when I didn't have time to catch up with them, like people that I used to work with at NAB. Like I've been reaching out to different people, like, actually, you know, you actually had a great impact. I enjoyed working with you. My kids were really young, so I didn't have a lot of time to catch up with lots of people. But now that I do, love to have a coffee with you.
That's interesting. It's funny. Quite often when people approach me because they're looking for a job, and the first thing I talk to them about is, well, what have you done? What have you actually done about this, apart from maybe tidy up your LinkedIn and dust off your resume and have a little gander on Seek? But the first thing I advise is that go back and just reconnect with old colleagues, people you enjoyed working with, find out what they're up to now, find out what's going on where they're working, because probably, and as a recruitment business, I probably shouldn't say this, but the greatest chance of finding a job is through your network.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And
the people that know you, trust you, like you, know your capabilities, they'll be the jobs that never make it to a job advert online, that never make it to a recruitment company. So go and invest. It's not hard. It's not hard to LinkedIn is a tool that enables you to do that, right? Just jump on. If you haven't got people's phone numbers, reconnect, have some coffees.
Oh, totally. And also it's actually quite enriching for your own learning and your own skill set. Like seeing, you know, I just love, like, there's a couple of people, and I've known them for 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
And I might be percolating an idea or a thought, or I might find a, you know, something challenging, especially I think when you're a leader, particularly managing people, you often have challenging circumstances you're in. Yep. It's nice to be able to ring people in your network and say, hey, you know, like, you're someone that I've noticed has been managing this in a way that I admire, or I'd love to find out a little bit more about. But if you stay in touch with people, they pay back, right?
Definitely.
And you learn so much from your network. Can I add a quick story?
Yeah,
I know this is a lightning round. So I attended a round table, and it was a breakfast. It was women, and so maybe it's us as females as well. And I'm going to caveat this with, you know, it is challenging when you're a mom, right? Because you can't always just be going to after work drinks. Yep. So I think we've got to rethink how we do some of these things as well. But so I went to this round table, and it was you know, I was a guest at this round table. And people asking different questions around, you know, how do you get a board role, or how do you manage, you know, progressing in an organization? And one of the questions I often ask now is like, let's hypothetically say you want to do more in your organization. Have you met the leaders in your organization? Have you had a coffee, you know, with one of the, you know, GMs or C-suite, depending on where you are, obviously. It's a bit more challenging, but you know, I think we often think people are going to say no, and they surprise you and they say yes. Yeah. And that's one way, you know, back to who are you networking with? Are you networking within your organization? Do they know what your goals are and what you're trying to drive? And then are you networking with people outside your organization? Because to your point, I mean, it's those phone calls where they say, hey, I remember you telling me that you were interested in this. And this thing has surfaced up, and I thought of you, right? So you don't realize how many seeds you plant when you
100%.
Go and have a conversation with people, catch up with people, share what is important to you, what's driving, you know, your passion, what you're interested in doing.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised, like, as I sat around this breakfast, how many people that were at this breakfast who were interested in doing. This was specifically around board, getting onto board, or you know, participating in some form of board advisory, etc., who just hadn't met with anybody and said, hey, this is something I'm interested in, you know, and weren't actually persisting with that conversation across an entire network of people. So I think it does take effort. I'm not going to undermine the effort that it takes, particularly when people have young children. But that's, you know, if there's anything I can leave for people behind here is, broaden your network, meet people, have a conversation, you know, have coffees with them, pick up the phone and ring them and ask them questions, ask for help.
Absolutely.
It's such a fantastic way to invest in your own learning, but have a community of people that support you, champion you, and guide you as well.
It's humans, we're social animals.
Yes.
And I read something, I think it was the book Sapiens, and he talks about this actually, how you never see two chimpanzees in the wild carrying a log together, right? They don't think to collaborate, right? They think about the task that they have to do.
Yep.
But animals, or the rest of the animal kingdom, has not learned to collaborate in the same way that we do socially as humans. That's why we can put a rocket on the moon, and why we can invent AI and all this other stuff, right? Because we've socially done that together. It wasn't one day one person woke up with an idea in isolation without talking to anybody else and invented these things. It's because we go off and we're social.
Do you find that you've been able to build your network through COVID, or have you been able to continue to?
It's an interesting question. I think probably more post-COVID.
Yep.
I think so. I think as the world's kind of come out of things. I think during COVID, actually, I did tons of catch-ups. It was much easier.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. It's easier now just to jump on a Zoom call. And actually, Dan, who I mentioned earlier, he's in Perth. So we've never met in person, but we meet over video, and there's still a way to do it. I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits, or the biggest positives that came out of COVID, was the adoption of video technology to communicate.
Yeah, like it's norm now, right?
It felt a bit weird before, as in a bit strange. Yeah. I remember doing a few Skype calls, and so they just retired Skype actually last week. But I remember doing a few, and it felt a bit weird and a bit, I don't know. But now it's just normal. You just jump on a call and off you go.
And everybody does it. Like grandma does it.
Yeah, that's right.
On FaceTime. Do you know
Whilst
what I mean?
investing in crypto?
That's like a whole new podcast, that one.
We're coming up for 2 hours, and I'm cognizant you've got a flight to catch. It's 3:15.
Oh, yeah, I got to run.
But my last question is what is the most significant feedback you've received in your career?
Say yes.
Yeah.
Like say yes to things.
Yeah.
And in fact, is this a Richard Branson quote? Fake it till you, no, just like he talks about, if you don't necessarily have the skills, keep at it and then develop the skills as you go. And I can't remember the quote.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think take a risk. Like someone said to me, just say yes and like take that risk, and then you have to put the hard yards in, I think. Right? Like with anything. But yeah, that would be my best advice.
And I think, you touched on that earlier. It takes effort. Everything takes effort.
Yes. Anything worth doing.
Exactly right. That's good. Awesome. Look, I'm going to let you go.
Thank you.
We could talk all day. I'm pretty confident about that until the cameras would run out. But look, thank you. You've been incredibly generous. I've really loved unpacking a lot of the stuff we talked through today. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Ember, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.